on introducing the Global Fragility Act. The Global Fragility Act is a very important piece of legislation that was passed at the end of 2019, a bipartisan piece of legislation that really focuses on reducing violence and elevating peace building and conflict prevention as a pillar of US foreign policy and development assistance. This is a 10-year plan, which will have broader plans in each of its focus countries, Haiti, Mozambique, Libya, PNG, Papua New Guinea, as well as the countries of littoral West Africa. And these countries were released, the names were released on April 1st. And so we're in a very exciting period where the US government is really thinking about and planning about how to implement this broad change in its policy in fragile and conflict affected states, and thrilled to have a group of exciting speakers here today. So we have Olivier Girard, the Chief of Party from the Littorals Regional Initiative. We have Robert Jenkins, the Assistant to the Administrator of USAID. Nathalie Lito, the Senior Project and Operations Manager at Cargill with over 18 years of experience in Haiti. And then Joseph Sani, Vice President, the African Center for the US Institute of Peace. And so we are going to ask each speaker to talk for 5 minutes, and then we're going to open it up into Q&A. And if you could please enter your questions in the chat, we'll do our best to address them. This is a short period of time, but we're really looking forward to an exciting discussion. So first, I'm going to turn it over to Olivier.
Thank you, Susanna. Thank you all. It's a great pleasure joining you from Accra, Ghana. Thank you for having me on this panel. As you mentioned, I work as a Chief of Party for the Littorals Regional Initiative, which is USAID OTI's program for coastal West Africa, implemented by Creative Associates. We have small teams in Ghana, Togo, and Benin, primarily working in the northern parts of each of these countries through small grants mechanism. We're entering our second year. In the first year, we've done about 60 grants with 45 different partners, the vast majority of which are local civil society partners. We work with also some local government entities, creating awareness on violent extremism, working with traditional leaders, religious leaders, local media, women, youth, moto taxi drivers. We weave these conversations with mentoring on leadership, communication, advocacy. And really the idea is to build local ownership of these problem sets. And we do work on some of the underlying risk factors we're seeing in coastal West Africa: intra-religious tensions, social marginalization of full-day communities. And really, GFA Global Fragility Act, the US strategy to prevent conflict, promote stability, and its principles are a confirmation that we're working in the right space with the right programming principles. The strategy calls for more adaptive, integrated, agile implementation. It calls for informed risk management in fragile environments. It really triumphs, principles of prevention, local ownership, thinking and working politically. Those are the right principles. So I would say kudos to those who wrote this strategy. I think this is the right approach. It's not necessarily a new approach as far as the work that I've been doing in West Africa with USAID, with OTI. We've been working with these principles for a few years, but it's important that we now see this elevated really at the policy level. I think when it comes to the country and regional prioritization, I do have a question, and that is, what happens to the other hotbeds of instability? In West Africa, for instance, what does GFA and the strategy mean for countries like Mali, Burkina, Niger, for Nigeria? Too often I hear phrases like, oh, the Sahel is gone. We no longer have a window of opportunity. As far as coastal West Africa is concerned, although there are genuine internal sources of instability, it's clear that as long as the northern border will remain controlled by Al-Qaeda and ISIS affiliates, the risk will not go away. We cannot simply work in coastal West Africa in isolation. We can't just build a wall around the coastal countries. And I'm not really seeing a good answer on that front for now. On the management and operational aspects of the strategy calls for an effective, integrated US government response. I'll use this as an opportunity to plea for as light and flexible a coordination and planning mechanism as possible. I work with US government officials every day. They are drowning in meetings and requests and taskers and VIP visits. And the last thing they actually have a time for is to go out of the embassy into the real world and talk to ordinary people. And there's a risk here, I think, if it's not managed properly, that GFA will just add another net administrative burden on these diplomats. And a good strategy should be informed by diplomats going out there and getting firsthand information and not just relying on internally generated narratives. As an implementing partner, of course, I'm very happy to be tasked with giving them this information, but I think there needs to be a deliberate effort to ensure that those that are involved with the strategy have the time to get out there, get out of the embassy, drive to these remote areas where there is instability, where we are trying to prevent conflict, and make better informed decisions. I think my last point is on stabilization assistance, and maybe this is not going to be a popular point here, but I think there needs to be more effective civil military programming on the front lines where the troops are deployed and where the communities are influenced by non-state actors. In my years in West Africa, I've seen this, and this is an ongoing gap. In coastal West Africa, in the last couple of years, we've seen all governments deploy additional troops to their northern borders. They're taking primarily a security approach, and typically the governments rely on us or other donors to provide soft, quote unquote, soft or civilian support, and there's no communication between the two. And I find that on the USG side, similarly, civilian and military assistance is a bit siloed. And we're getting a lot of requests at the local level from youth groups, from local officials, for civil security sector dialogues, for engagement, for sensitization, for trust building between the communities and the troops that are supposed to protect them. And our assistance mechanisms are not really tailored for that. And so I think we need new ways to imagine how we can provide this assistance from even just a regulatory perspective. So I'll stop here. Thank you, Susanna. I hope I didn't exceed my time. Thanks.
Right on time, Olivier. And that was excellent. And what you put forward as a vision for civil military cooperation and really kind of addressing the bureaucratic barriers to that, it's exactly what the GFA should be doing and is supposed to be doing. So I think that's pretty exciting to put that forward as a concrete initiative. So now we're moving to Rob Jenkins, who has decades of experience in this and as a real leader in how the US government operates in these spaces. So Rob, what should the GFA really focus on, or the implementation of the GFA focus on, to make a difference?
Well, thank you, Susanna. Hello, everybody. It's great to see you, Olivier, Sani, Natalie. Let me just start out saying it has taken us longer to get to where we are now than we expected. But with the April 1st announcement by the president of the focus countries and region, we are really excited to get out of the planning phase and into where we are now, which is the implementation phase, implementing the US strategy to prevent conflict and promote stability. I've been saying lately that it's a very difficult time for people anywhere on this globe who want to promote peace and stabilization, but never before, probably in the history of the world, with this week's announcement of over 100 million people now being displaced, never has there been a time when peace builders are more needed. And we are happy that the US government calls ourselves peace builders once again up among those ranks. And I'm really excited to be talking to this group. Olivier is emblematic of, you are not just talkers, these are doers, right? So words without deeds are a waste of time. So we, moving forward, are really going to have to look at what exactly do we need to change. In fact, the law mandates us to take a hard look at what do we need to do differently to be better. And many of you are steeped in, have spent years in our budget processes, have spent years in our authorities, have spent years dealing with our bureaucracy. You know that we can be better, and we can be better together. We need you to tell us how to do that. So the three things I want to hit on. Number one is related to that. We have to get a lot more specific about what it is we want to change. How are we going to change? How do we do that? What does that look like? Now, already you have USAID, DOD, Department of State, united together, declaring with other parts of our government, we are going to focus on these places for 10 years. That's different. That's innovation. Doesn't sound exciting, but to a bureaucrat like me, that's really exciting. So things are already different. We have a long way to go. Second, we have to make sure that Field-driven, locally led, localization are not just bumper stickers. What does it really mean? All of us who have seen effective programs out there in the real world know that if it does not involve people themselves taking ownership both of the design, the process, and the outcomes, we're all wasting our time. So, I'm not talking just about local governments. I'm talking about community groups, about civil society, about journalists, about teachers, about just people. They need to work on these things with us. Flip that around. We need to work with them as we implement. Otherwise, we're wasting everybody's time. I don't care what part of what sector you're working on across the development spectrum. The evidence is very clear. If the participants in the program are not in the driver's seat, we're all wasting our time. No foreign government, no foreign entity can come in and with a solution and think that things are going to work. And nobody needs the United States government to mansplain to them how things should be in their country. They know better than we do. So we should shut up. We should listen. We should be realistic about what our expectations are about what we can do. Approach it with humility, approach it with kindness, and get into real, respectful relationships with these governments, with civil society, with folks where they are, and work with them on that. Third, we have to be, and we are committed to uncovering the mystery of whether prevention actually works. As President Biden said, and I'll quote from what he said on the 1st with the announcement, the 1st of April, prevention is hard work, measured not in days and weeks, but in years and generations. Its successes are never as evident as its failures, and it requires us to remain focused on lasting peace and stability over the allure of easier, more temporary gains that may not strengthen our position for the long term. So we've committed ourselves to 10-year strategies. 10 years gives us the opportunity to iterate, to change, to learn. We'll have monitoring and evaluation. We'll have knowledge management platforms across the agency. We will revolutionize, believe this, we are going to work on set goals and objectives that measure and evaluate and analyze how we're doing as a government, not just USAID, not just DOD, but all of us. Are we getting to where we need to be? I could keep talking for a long, long time. I'm the boring bureaucrat on this panel. You don't want to hear any more from me. I'll just end with this. We are going to need all of you. We're going to need your experience. We're going to need your insights. We're going to need your analysis. We're going to need you to help us be better, and you can hold us accountable, because we're all on this journey for 10 years together, and it's extremely exciting to me. I hope you're just a little bit as excited as I am. Thanks.
Well, Rob, that was far from a boring bureaucrat's 5-minute talk. So thank you. And I'm very excited to hear your enthusiasm and your frame of the GFA and what you think it can do. I think one of the biggest challenges with prevention is that prevention is in fact a very kind of revolutionary, potentially status quo altering act before there's the urgency to do it. So it's one of the most challenging ways of engaging, and really looking forward to hopefully picking up on that more in Q&A. So now we're going to pass it on to Nathalie Lieto to talk about what this might look like in Haiti, which is of course one of the focus countries, and where the US government should really prioritize its support to and its engagement with Haiti.
Thank you, Susanna. I'm very happy to be here with the panelists. My experience is that of working on and in Haiti for a number of years. And while right now I'm not currently involved in country, I'm still very much in touch with what's happening. And I find that the GFA is a great opportunity really for the US government to take this holistic approach to what is happening in country. I will say that there have been, at least in Haiti, and in my experience, there have been moments of coordination between different groups, whether it's between coordination between economic development and governance, or between disaster risk reduction and environmental strengthening. So there have been efforts of coordination, but many things, in my opinion anyway, one of the problems is that there is no overall coherence of what that looks at as on a global level. And I think having a legislation that enables the different bodies in the U.S. government to look at this in a more holistic way, and also with a longer longevity, will allow us to really put forth a path that can take a more cohesive approach into solving some of these issues that we have. A lot of the problems stem with the distrust, for example, that a lot of the civil society groups may have with the different programs that are being implemented in country. Well, how do you change that? I think coordination of and dialogue, and I think since 9/11 things have changed a lot across the world, but certainly that capacity of, as Olivier mentioned, to be able to go out of the embassy and be able to really sort of be interactive with the various members of civil society will certainly bring to bear what the country needs and what the different stakeholders are really looking to achieve. The second point, the fact that we're looking at a 10-year program or interventions that are longer than 2 or 3 years, that are not just project-based, will be really beneficial. There's a lot to learn from, and I think there's a whole body of work that has been done, not just in Haiti, but also in different countries, and I think we need to learn from those, get the lessons learned from those, and have a real discussion, a real opportunity to discuss and see what has worked, what has not, and why. And I think we don't always ask ourselves why. Interacting with civil society is absolutely essential, given the current context that we have in Haiti, where we do not have a military, but we are looking at sort of, and I hate to say this word, but a disintegration of the safety context, the security context in Haiti, where people are afraid to even stay in their own neighborhoods because of gang violence. Well, how are we going to address that? We're talking about an economic issue. We're talking about a political issue. We're talking about, housing. We're talking about changing the way really people are looking at surviving in these contexts. So I think it's important to have those conversations with the stakeholders, and I think that the GFA is really well positioned, not only on the U.S. side, to really look at how they're going to interact, how the strategic vision that the U.S. government has in helping Haiti might go, but also to have an opportunity to really sort of listen to the various actors that are on the ground and really bring to bear those needs in a cohesive and engaged way. My experience has been that in addition to that, it's also important to see what's being done in other groups. What is being done, for example, by the UN and by other agencies, because not only are we looking at a US approach, but we're also looking at something that has to be really more cohesive, and so that we're speaking the same language as we go forth in this 10-year plan. So I hope I'm not too long, but
you're just right.
Just some of the ideas that I think are important to discuss, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
That's great, Natalie. And both you and Olivier really pointed to kind of the importance and challenge of coordination, that there is no mechanism to bring all these people together and all these different actors, and particularly with the ambition of the GFA to have much more inclusive processes and decision-making, and to really share the burden beyond the US government, right? Potentially means a bunch of boring meetings that actually, as Olivier said, prevent people from actually talking to the people who they're supposed to talk to. So really kind of solving this coordination problem is an important problem that the GFA will have to find ways, or the US government will have to find ways to address and really innovate. So Sani, we're passing it on to you now to kind of wrap us up in this initial phase. Please go ahead.
That's a very difficult task, I must admit, Susanna. Thank you for this, and thank you for SID Washington, D.C. for bringing us all together. I think it's a very impressive panel, as you can see. Olivier, thank you for reminding us. I call them ideas from the front lines, and thank you for bringing those ideas forward. And Rob, you were more than a bureaucrat. You were a leader here. This was Rob, the leader, trying to galvanize people. And I mean, thank you for the energy you brought, and optimism and the ambition. And Natalie, thank you. Thank you for raising some of the challenges and the dilemmas already I wanted to talk about. I think for me, looking at I will call the SPCPS, the strategy for to prevent conflict and promote stability. I think looking at it, I think it's a paradigm shift. Olivier, you said the approach is not new, I agree, but at the level of concept and policy, I think it's a paradigm shift. A paradigm shift because of two sets of attributes. We have a shift into the approach because now we are looking at fragility as a systemic, a whole of a society problem, right? So that's a key difference here. Something that comes with its own challenges as well. So there is a long-term whole of a society approach, that 10-year plan. This is a paradigm shift in the US thinking of our peace-building approach as a country. Number two, the whole of a government approach. We are moving not only from collaboration, I think we have, back in the days, we come together, we plan, and then everybody goes and does his own thing. Now we are looking beyond collaboration to integration, right? The 3Ds. So is important. It's uncharted territory. It comes with dilemma and challenges. And in terms of tools, we have strategic new tools. We have, for example, the desire to bring in other partners and local partners under a compact style approach, mutual accountability, and the pool fund. So those are new tools, new strategic ways of doing business. And we also think of learning. I love it. Recognizing that we are not just learning for accountability, but learning to improve. That's another shift here. I'm raising all those drivers of the shift, the paradigm shift, to show that, to remind us that we are all in uncharted territory. It will require humility, it will require creativity, flexibility, and the willingness to accept failure and be honest about it. And even when we talk to Congress, people in Congress recognize it. This is very uncharted territory. So sometimes it's better to say, no, I promised this, I failed, but I learned something, right? So I will invite everyone implementing the SPCPS to think in terms of humility, learning, etc. So, but also the paradigm shift, from my perspective, raises fundamental two key aspects. Local ownership is key. Local ownership, not just host country, which is very important, I will talk about it, but also local ownership driven by what Olivier called our local diplomats. It means that missions becomes critical players here, right? So missions will be not Washington, DC. Mission become critical players. And then to succeed here, we need the buy-in from mission so that they can actually communicate this paradigm shift with their local counterparts, like the host country. This is critical. It's not a given. It's not a given, based on our experiences. And local ownership, then, the way we operationalize it, we put 3 C's: commitment, capacity, contribution. So the commitment from the mission and the host country will require that there is some sort of buy-in, understanding of the paradigm shift, and what this new approach will take. Otherwise, we will go back to the default approach and there will be no change. The default approach meaning we do business as usual, obviously. So we will need some commitment from our mission and from our local partners. That's critical. Capacity, we all know. And Olivier alluded to this. This will require new capacities and capabilities from our mission and also our local counterparts. Are we ready? Are missions ready to embrace this? Even if they are committed, do they have the capacity, the capabilities to go beyond coordination to integration of the DoD, state, US, all our instruments, right? Even treasury to deliver. And we have to be humble, recognize that, and work with mission and local partners. We are talking about the concept of mutual accountability too, meaning that we will have to be held to account by our local partners. And that requires a great deal of humility, my friends. So it's again a new uncharted territory. It means that we have to be in the room where it happens. We have to open our doors to make sure that localization is not just a concept, it is a reality. So those are some of the challenges posed by local ownership, which is at the heart of the SPAC-PS. I will stop there and then we can explore further in our question and answer sessions. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sani. Really important points. And I love the 3 C's, which I hadn't heard in that way before. So we're going to head to Q&A. So please, we only have about 22 minutes left and we want to hear from you. So please put your questions in the chat and we'll do our best to address them. So Olivier, the first question is for you. So I can't actually see the name of the person who put it right here. So, but this individual says that they'd love to hear more about one of your first points on the importance of not acting in isolation with the Global Fragility Act countries and how you think about this. What does it actually look like? One, to take a real regional approach among, within the littoral region, but also within the countries that are part of the kind of political dynamics of that region, but are actually excluded. And maybe kind of think through what the implications would be and what this actually looks like in practice.
Well, thank you. I can't possibly answer all of that in 1 minute, but I think certainly one thing we're trying to do in the coastal West Africa at the moment is bring in the experiences and the perspective of those who have lived with violent extremism and instability in the last few years to share their experience with people in coastal West Africa. So we're actively collaborating with the programs and the people that we know in Burkina Faso, in Niger, trying to do information exchanges and make sure that we don't reinvent the wheel, but we capitalize on what was learned painfully over the last 10 years in the Sahel, for example. On the issue, and I do think we need to think about stabilization in an integrated manner with the Sahel and coastal West Africa. I hope to see further strategic inputs from the U.S. government taking that into consideration. So maybe that's a question for Rob, not for me.
Right. So I'm going to build on this, and I think that was from Maria Presley. So in the research that I've done and that others have done on integration as opposed to coordination, what becomes very clear is that there are kind of 2 things. One is that it needs to be problem driven, that you can't try to kind of push a bureaucracy together from the top down. You have to create mechanisms for it to respond to a single problem with a coherent approach. So how do you do that? Like, what are some ideas around that? And furthermore, and Rob, this is actually to you because it seems to be one of the greatest challenges of the GFA, that leadership really matters there, that you can't have 5 leaders coming up with a coherent solution, right? That you really need somebody in charge who can help to push it forward. So what does that look like, given the US government structure, to have a kind of much more integrated, coherent approach? Who leads?
Well, thank you. It's a great question. Everyone believes in coordination and no one wants to be coordinated. And we're watching this play out in real time now as we start to implement the strategy. What does it mean to be field driven? We need our ambassadors in the field to own and lead these processes. Washington loves saying that and immediately says, oh, but wait, I have just a few comments on that. And then you're like, wait a second, what happened to field driven? This is going to be something that's, obviously, we've been trying to do this for over 2 decades and we haven't gotten it right. So Congress had to act and make an act and say, we're making it the law that you do better on these things. So what someone had said earlier, we have to get, I think Asani, we've got to get our mission directors and our ambassadors to buy in totally, and so far they completely are. But going back to Olivier's point, we cannot let this be another layer of bureaucratic BS that crowds their day even more and keeps them from getting outside and talking and having the consultations they need to have. So how do we do this with a light touch, but yet have it be radical change? That is one of the many challenges that we see. Regarding the Sahel, no one, I think, is saying the Sahel is lost. And we need to prioritize somewhere. So about 2 years ago, we created the CPS Bureau, Conflict Prevention Stabilization Bureau. We knew we could not change everything everywhere at the same time, although we had to, but we did decide we're going to prioritize in the Sahel and coastal West Africa and try things there that we might not try everywhere else. So when they were drafting the Global Fragility Act, originally some folks thought it should be everywhere doing this. And then someone came in and said, hold on a sec, let's focus on about 5 to 7 places at first. If the real objective is to do this better, why would we learn how to do things better and then not start doing it everywhere? But I garden on the weekends, right? And there's those times when you go into the garden and you say, there are so many things, oh my, I can't take care of all these things, and you're overwhelmed. Or you say, I am going to tend to these projects this weekend because I got to start somewhere, and then maybe next weekend I can take some more on. This is not the end all be all of what we're going to do with GFA for the next 10 years. This is how we're going to prioritize, try these things out. And as we are learning in real time, we can roll those out, hopefully, and get others in the bureaucracy who say, oh my gosh, that's really working. We should try that. And that was what, circling back, what leadership would look like. Diffused leadership that is highly focused at the local level, hopefully in a dream world, allowing for decentralization. Over.
I love the vision and the gardening analogy. I wish I could take a gardening analogy for everything in my life. It would all be much more manageable. So I want to kind of push you on that and bring others into the fold here a little bit, because one of the major challenges with the GFA is this kind of reporting to Congress, right? So in many ways, the GFA increases the stakes by it increases the opportunities and increases the stakes and increases the complexity of engaging in these contexts, because now Congress wants to see regular monitoring. They want to see indicators that are shared across the countries. They want some real accountability for advancement. How does this accountability for advancement to DC not undermine locally led leadership, adaptation, learning, engagement, all of these things which are actually more difficult to measure, and we haven't been measuring them? How do these things not cancel each other out? So I want to put that to everyone on the panel. I don't want Rob just to be in the hot seat here. And Olivier and Joseph, and Sunny, I'd like to start with you on this. So Sunny, I'm going to start with you, and then we'll see if what Olivier wants to add on to that.
I don't think of those as counseling. I think, because I said again, we are shifting, it's a paradigm shift here. I think these are new incentive structures to push us to reimagine how we can do things differently. I think that's how I look at those. Of course, the great problem here is time, that the pressure of time, you have to deliver quickly. But as Rob said, if we accept the premise that we are also learning in this process. By the way, not learning just for us to be better, but learning and improve the impact. I think that's something we can not negotiate, but the Congress will understand. I mean, there are no benchmark or targets here for the moment, right? So we are testing a new incentive structure, but we need accountability, even for post-mission, to buy into this. Without a clear accountability mechanism, guess what? I know Rob said the post-mission have bought into it. Washington is ready to relinquish some of the control or whatever. But if there are no clear accountability and incentive structure to adopt new behavior, then we will not have the change we desire. So I look at them as new incentive structure rather than constraint canceling each other.
Great, excellent. So Olivier, how do these incentive structures travel down, and how do you, like, what do you think works in terms of some accountability incentive structure here?
Well, I think for us, we're really trying, going back to local ownership, we're trying to build with our grantees and our partners that the habits of good reporting on outcomes, on the impact that they're having. And that's for a lot of people here, it's a mind shift. It's a change in mentality, because they're not used to reporting on what do participants think, what do they feel, what have they been doing, what are the outcomes of what they're doing. So there's a lot of grassroots level work to be done to build a culture of reporting on outcomes and impact. And then we aggregate this, and our job, and Rob will say this, our job is to tell our story. And if we're, as a program, one of many programs, we're not able to tell our story, then it's really hard to report to Congress. So I think our job here is to work and make sure that everybody on our staff and our partners and our grantees know how to tell their story, know how to report on the work that they're doing. And that takes time, but it's the work that we're doing. And I think we're seeing a lot of good come out of that process, and it changes the way people see their own work. So that's what I can add on this topic. Start from the ground up.
I think that's really interesting, that it's not just about, filling out log frames and filling out indicators and outcome reports, right? That it really is also about empowering and enabling the people doing this work to tell the story of what happens, right? But this also means, when you're thinking about communicating that to DC or to Congress, that maybe there need to be other avenues for reporting than just a document, right? So thinking about other kind of mixed media ways, what are ways of communicating what's going on, rather than just writing it up in a dense document that people don't want to read? And maybe that's part of the innovation that can come from here. I wanted to, Sunny, did you have a follow-up? Natalie also had something on this. So do you have a follow-up before then?
Just quickly on that, and then I like that point of finding new ways of reporting, of telling that story. But I think one of the key challenges here will be to find some agreed indicators, some minimum indicators, like indicators of integration, for example, right? Indicators of what does it mean for local ownership? What does it mean? So how do we measure success? So there is a conversation here that needs to happen, to take place at different levels, right? To agree on those set of indicators and work with, whether it is Inter or people from the ground, but we need those sets of indicators so that we can tell our story better.
And that's really important, because if you want to incentivize different behaviors, then you want to actually measure and monitor those behaviors that you want to incentivize. So not just outcome indicators or impact indicators, talking about implementation and process-based indicators, right? What type of integration is taking place? How's it working? What kinds of consultations? Is the information being reintegrated or integrated into decision-making? And that's a whole different way than the US government has actually been monitoring what's going on, but it would shift the incentives. So I want to turn it over to Natalie now, who was talking about the need for this really to be driven by the missions. Do you want to build on that?
Yeah, I know. I mean, I do think that while Washington can sort of provide the framework of what they want, where they want to go in the different areas, I think that the most informed will be the people on the ground. And I'm not just talking about the ambassadors. I think that is great. They are representative of the US government and should be participating in these processes. But I'm also talking about all the employees that are working and all the people who are really doing the day-to-day work and having those connections and those relationships with the various stakeholders. I think Joseph talked about paradigm shifts, and I think that's, giving accountability to those people that are on the ground and are really sort of becoming the connectors with the various stakeholders is important, because they're the ones who are going to be able to see something and who will be able to then bring this information back to the mission and have the conversations with the other members of the missions that might be interested or may have ways of coordinating other activities that they might be doing. So I think it's important to have that opportunity given to them. And that also comes with the way we're thinking about measuring impact and measuring how things are going. Normally, when you're an implementer, you have a certain number of indicators that you have to do, whether they're F indicators on the economic growth opportunities, or different indicators related to how you're, how you're managing the resources, et cetera. But now that we're talking more of a MEL, a monitoring, evaluation, and learning agenda, or a CLA, where, when we're doing really the learning agenda component, we can bring that to the table at the ground level and really have our partners really be participants in that learning agenda. I'm thinking specifically when we're looking at conflict. Well, what does that mean for different stakeholders? How are they managing those issues of conflicts, and what can they bring to bear in that conversation? And really sort of having that opportunity to let the people on the ground sort of lead the discussion and then change the way we're reporting. Whereas we're not just tied to a technical report, or we're not just tied to a financial report, but really talking about how are we measuring impact, and how does that change? With the GFA's up, kind of long-term look, I think we're also have an opportunity to say, okay, what can be done in 2 years? What can be done in 4? How does that change in year 5, 6, or 7? And that would be a better way for policy to be developed, and also for projects to sort of reshift their focus based on what has been learned 2 or 3 years before.
I think that's really smart, Natalie, because if we take it in the sense that you're not just improving the kind of programming over time, you're actually improving your ability to do that type of programming, which means that even if you can only make this bureaucratic shift in year 1, you're setting it up for bureaucratic shift 2 and 3, right,
Correct,
in the subsequent years. And so thinking about the kind of institutional change moving forward with the implementation of the projects. We only have 6 more minutes, so I want to kind of push you all on one final question, which is that, I've been researching aid in fragile and conflict affected states for about 25 years in different ways. And the one thing that's clear to me is that the US government is often the actor that is most hidden behind walls, that is most disconnected, in part because of the security provisions, but also because of the nature of the contractual relationship. Right, that so much is subcontracted that it's not clear that the US government has access to, say, the learning that Olivier is engaged in. So talk to me a little bit about what your vision is for kind of shifting. And of course, Rob, OTI is always the exception to this, right? But how does this vision of OTI, kind of what is good and kind of innovative in OTI, how does that become more long-term and engaged with kind of a broader set of US government actors in this space?
Well, thanks, Susanna. There's so much I want to say. I want to speak to about 47 different points that were raised. First, anytime someone mentions a log frame, a little part of me dies, but that's all right. And Olivier and others, there's no doubt that we need new, better ways to tell our stories. And when, Sani, you talk about objectives and process objectives, not just programmatic, that is really what we're going to be trying to do with monitoring, learning, and evaluation, and the implementation plans we put together and how we do that. And spending all of our time reporting to Congress, let's get some of those reports out of the way because no one's reading them. Oh, but wait, Congress mandates those reports and then doesn't read them. So one of the things on all of this is getting together with Congress as a partner and taking hold of government into the congressional branch as well, and saying, we need your help to get rid of the following things. Because Susanna, you're exactly right. As soon as you have something mandated by Congress, there's a threat level that goes up to people. Well, there's hydraulics here. We're trying to say we need to take more risks, but now people are going to get scared because now they're being watched. We have got to sit with Congress, talk to them. I was up there with colleagues from DOD and state just last week saying, we are all in this together. You've got to let us have our folks in the field have a little room to try something new. And if it doesn't work, don't get too upset. This is how we iterate. This is how we learn. And if you want more of USAID to be more like OTI, that's getting a relief valve on the risk thing. And that if you want more US diplomats outside of embassies, it's letting people take a little more risk. Let us get outside. Let us fund a group that might not have been funded before, and it might not work, but we'll just do it a little bit and see if it works. It's all about risk. But that's all about Congress. It's all about making a paradigm shift, not just in the executive branch, but in the relationship with Congress. Let us implement this act, which is identify the things that are in our way and to take risks implementing in a new way and then rolling that out in other places.
Extremely well said, and pulled together all the different strains in just a few minutes. We have 3 minutes, one per person. So Olivier, I'm turning to you first. What would you like to close out with?
Well, not a question, but maybe just another challenge. I think there's a real challenge in getting more people out to the field, in recruitment wise. I think there's a, globally there's a labor shortage, and I think this industry is not different. I think getting people that are willing and wanting to spend long amounts of time in West Africa, Haiti, Mozambique is a challenge, and we have to find ways also to attract good talent to this industry. People that speak French, Portuguese, Spanish, etc., that can help us deliver those programs. And I think that's a task that shouldn't be underestimated, not only on the USG side, but also the implementing partners, private sector, nonprofit, etc. I think that's a real issue. Thanks.
Great. I have many students who are waiting in line. So anyhow, it's very interesting. There's lots of people who want to do it, but actually getting the right people in the right place at the right time is part of the challenge. Yeah. Natalie.
I would say that in our conversations, and while we're looking more on what the USAID, what the US side is going to have to coordinate inside, that we also don't forget how to coordinate with our stakeholders on the ground. Because, we can talk about a strategy and we can say this is what we want to do as a US sort of entity. But if we don't have the local buy-in, if we don't really analyze the problems in a way that looks at how we can provide potential solutions and how we can bring to bear, our stakeholders' ideas and visions as well into one sort of cohesive thing, then we don't get local buy-in. And if we don't have local buy-in, then we're doomed to sort of repeat the mistakes of the past. So right. I think it's important to keep that in mind when we're looking at implementation. So how do we bring in that coordination or that sort of learning agenda, not only for ourselves, but also for our partners on the ground?
Actually, the most important voice in the room. So really important. Sani, we have like 30 seconds.
Yes, I say everyone summarized very well what I was about to say. I will just say, let us not analyze to paralyze. Local governments, our local partners have strategy plans. They have plans. They know where to take their country. They don't have the resources. They don't have the processes. So let us work, build on what they have, and together make the journey. So it's like Mashakani, right? You want to work with somebody, go where they come from, learn, start with what they have, build on what they know, and together make the journey. So please, let us not analyze to paralyze.
Beautifully said. Thank you so much, everybody. Really well done. Grateful to have this chance to be with you all. And thanks for the opportunity to moderate this panel. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.